Lisa F., a 13-year-old Russian-German girl, was reported missing in 2016, where she had been kidnapped and raped by 3 Muslim men. The digital euro will allow the commission to seize your money. And the so-called Bucha massacre appears to have been fabricated. So far, these statements have been examples of disinformation. But not just any disinformation. Hybrid attacks on behalf of the EU's largest neighbor, aimed at destabilizing the Union through impenetrating all spheres of public influence, directly, through proxies, and through the media, all in continuation of its war effort. Let us dive in on how the EU may defend itself at the face of conflict.
Hi there, and welcome to the Truth from the Trenches podcast. And today I'm joined by 4 fellow students from the Leiden University Honours program. And we will be speaking about how the EU can tackle the current geopolitical challenges with a focus on common defence. With current world developments, the EU is pursuing major defence reforms. This shift is controversial. Some deem it overdue, while others oppose it. And today, together, we will try to answer the question, what can the EU do to protect itself? But before we do that, let's do a little tour de table. So, first of all, to my right, who's sitting here?
Hi, good morning. My name is Begum. I am from Security Studies. It's my first year, and I'm very excited to be recording this podcast with my fellow students.
Great, thank you.
My name is Jonas, and I'm a second-year IS student, and I'm also doing the honors program for FGGA.
Well, hello everybody, I am Ivan, as you might know me. I'm from Bulgaria. I do IRO, International Relations, and very excited about a safe Europe.
And hey everyone, I'm Daniel. I'm from Hungary. I am also a first year in IRO, and yeah.
And then lastly, my name is Alain. I'm a second year in public administration, and I'm really looking forward to the rest of this podcast. And to start off with, I thought it might be fun to have all of you answer some elevator questions. So I'll ask all of you a bit of a controversial question, and you have 30 seconds to answer it. So Begum, I'd like to start with you.
Thank you.
Who owns the truth?
I feel like that's a very difficult question, but if we look at the defense policy and how the European states are conducting themselves, it very much depends on the risk appetite of each country and what they are willing to convey to their public. It's a lot of media framing, I want to say.
Well, within 30 seconds. Ivan. European defense. Should we have a European army?
Oh, that's it's quite a pickle because the EU calls for NATO to be the common army of the EU. However, not everybody in the EU is in NATO, and it seems not every in the NATO wants to be NATO. So it's a challenging front, especially considering the current geopolitical climate. I would hope we don't have to, but we have to prepare for war in order to avoid it. So maybe we need to strive for more cooperation in the field.
Okay. Jonas, another question. Should we have a federal European state?
That's also a very difficult question you're asking, Alan, but it is definitely something that has been in the talks and something that a lot of people want to do. But whether that's feasible in the short term or say the next 20 years is not something I think is going to happen anytime soon, but I think that we are moving towards a strongly integrated union. So I think, there's a bet in favor of that and a bet against
And then lastly, should we kick out financially struggling member states from the euro?
Well, I would say no, for the reason of strategy. Kicking out nations would basically alienate them from the Central European system and risk pushing them towards geopolitical competitors, mainly, of course, especially in the case of Eastern Europe, Russia. So, no.
That's possibly the clearest answer we've had so far. It's a clear no. Then to continue, the five of us went to Brussels last week. Personally, I had a lot of fun. And Begum, could you tell us a little more about where we went and who we spoke to?
Yes, of course, I can do that. I also had a lot of fun. It was a very educational trip, in my opinion. I think the rest of us can all agree. But we were there for 3 days and we visited an array of different institutions, namely the EU Parliament, the Holland House, where we spoke with a lobbyist or a communication strategist, as he so kindly called it. And later on, we went to EEAS and the European Commission, and we ended our trip with visiting the permanent representation of the Netherlands to the European Union. Which one was your favorite? Maybe we can go around the table.
I definitely think the second trip to the European Parliament was my favorite. It was what I sort of missed from the first visit was maybe more a behind the scenes tour of like the various rooms and the facilities, and we kind of got that in the second trip. And we also got to have a very in-depth conversation with Angelica Petrov, which I'm not mistaken, about sort of EU's security policy and and also just in general, like what they're doing behind the scenes right now due to the current developments in international politics. So yeah, that was definitely my favorite.
Well, the second trip to the European Parliament is definitely up there, but I would also say that I enjoyed the communication strategist's presentation very well. IT industry that I am highly interested in and would consider a future career.
The glass industry.
Yes, of course, I would like to work in a glass factory.
So it can be very transparent, of course.
Yes, it was fun to have a little view through the window with the glass lobbyist. I really enjoyed the way he spoke, the way he really helped us understand the way lobbyists find their way in Brussels, the importance of their work as well. There's, of course, a negative connotation with the word lobbyist. I think he did well in explaining why he was doing this work. So I really enjoyed that. What was your favorite?
I think I have to agree. It was either our private tour and chat with Miss Petrov or the lovely communication strategist on day one. I think that in both of those cases, we got to see how, like, the background of the European Union works, like genuinely the backbone, right? And also what we talked about was, it was very, very cool from a security policy of a European Union to how this is influenced within tech industry of Europe as well.
And I was amazed by the fact that she gave us 2 hours of her time.
Yes.
Our precious time, late in the afternoon.
Exactly. She was lovely. Thank you, Miss Petrov. All the way from The Hague. Thank you so much.
Now, maybe just to give a bit more information about what we spoke about during the meeting.
Yeah, sure. So our discussion focused on European security, and as dimensions of European security, we discussed misinformation and disinformation, AI specifically, we also discussed the technological competitiveness of the European Union, as well as the capabilities of the European Union in traditional industries.
Ivan, what did you take away from the discussion we had with Ms. Petrov?
Well, at first, when I was messaging Ms. Medel as well and Ms. Petrov, there was a bit of a hesitation, considering their portfolio is mainly focused on the digital sphere, technology, innovation, entrepreneurship. However, conflicts nowadays, they encompass everybody. They affect everyone in every imaginable way. So I was very pleased that we found some common ground in cybersecurity and, in preventing misinformation that comes later, but also making sure our technology is well protected, it stays European, away from external threats. So I think focuses on that stuff and focuses on how security can have an impact on everyone and on every industry. That is something you really have to think about when it comes to protecting ourselves.
Yes, I agree. One thing I took away from it was just how great it is that the EU actually gets anything done. Mm-hmm. When you think about it, 720 MEPs, 27 member states. Mm-hmm. And yes, of course, it's a slow process. I would like it to be faster, but it's great to see things being done, people thinking about the future of Europe. And of course, they don't always agree. Luckily, they don't always agree. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I was amazed by just how much thought and effort was put into this entire process.
Yeah. As we see, there are also some very drastic changes, emergencies, crises, which cause the European Parliament to get to solutions in as less as 2 months. So.
One thing that, going back to the conversation, that stood out to me, it was a comment that the EU is a bit of a ping-pong ball right now. It's bouncing from situation to situation, acting reactively and not really having time to be proactive with policy. And that is something that I don't really have any policy change ideas that would fix this, but when we're talking about the decision making in the European Union, that should be something that should raise alarm bells. I think that it's really only crises that are able to incentivize quick, decisive, common European action.
I mean, yeah, I think one thing we are good at as the European Union is crisis management, and I think it's good that we are able to react in ways that maybe put out the fire, but we need lasting solutions to be able to sustain our spot in the world and in the geopolitical playground.
And I think the interesting thing here is that the EU has always needed crises to create big changes, institutional changes as well. So in some sense, the current crises, world crises, are actually an opportunity for the EU. Mm-hmm.
It's also to exist, if we look back at the 1950s, there's a very big reason the EU exists right now, and it's not too pretty. Yeah. But it has brought us peace so far.
It has brought us peace so far. So far. Yeah.
So far within the borders.
Yeah.
We'll be going for a quick break to get a cappuccino and some stroopwafels, and we'll be back after the ad.
When I ask myself what I get up for in the morning, for a good salary, to learn new things, to develop myself further, in a great team. But now it's also about more. The world is changing. I want to work on solutions for the major challenges of our time. For a secure future. Taking responsibility in a changing world. At Rheinmetall.
We just need one. Go ahead. Okay, welcome back to the Truth from the Trenches podcast, where we will now be talking about European common defence, and to do so we first need a little introduction. So after World War II, the idea of a European common defence emerged as part of a broader goal to ensure peace in Europe and to prevent future conflicts. And it was Winston Churchill in 1950 who proposed the European Defence Community, the EDC, which was a plan to create a pan-European army under, here it comes, supranational control, integrating the military forces of France, West Germany, Italy, and the Benelux countries. And yes, you heard that correctly, German forces in a common army in 1950. So this was truly a bold plan. However, despite the treaty on the EDC being signed in 1952, it never came into force because famously the French Parliament rejected it because they were worried about losing national sovereignty. After it failed, the European countries focused on NATO and later developed the Western European Union, which was more of a looser defense arrangement. Momentum for EU level defense cooperation came later during the Yugoslav wars because Europe's inability to act decisively highlighted the need for a stronger role. This led to a common security and defense policy, which we have now, which was part of the Treaty of Amsterdam. But now, of course, Europe stands at a crossroads. Do we integrate our defenses or do we respect national state autonomy? Jonas.
So you pose an interesting question here. When it comes to the integration of a European army, it is not necessarily very practical to do it within the EU framework. There are reasons why we have not had it yet. And as you mentioned, like, we have NATO, and generally, like, European defense is handled through the framework of NATO together with the United States. And until now, like, we've been relying on this transatlantic cooperation to organize our militaries. But you obviously, things are now changing a little due to the US pulling back. And so the EU has been putting talks of a European army back on the table. Now, generally, like, it's difficult to say whether it's necessary to establish a fully European army that is under the joint command of Ursula von der Leyen. The EU is a very, like, bureaucratic organization, as we all know, and there's a lot of legislation and policies and negotiations that need to be completed before you can be anywhere near this ideal that people, proponents of a federal army, would be are in favor of. And so, what I think will most likely happen for the time being is that maybe the EU and NATO will integrate their cooperation more gradually, but most likely it will still be under sort of a NATO framework that defense is organized, while we see now that individual countries are increasing their military spending, like Germany, I assume France, and other European countries. So I don't think anything's going to change that drastically soon, at least in regards to the European army idea.
I read that even Belgium wants to reach the 2% military spending goal, which is the first time since the war, I guess. Belgium traditionally hasn't spent much on the military. Now, Begum, we just talked about the role of NATO, and since the election of Donald Trump for the second time, we have seen a shift in American foreign policy. Mm-hmm. Do you still consider the US an ally?
I think that's a very difficult question to answer because technically, on paper, they are still an ally, right? But from the way that they're behaving, I believe that the EU is currently trying to see what they can do to become as independent as they can be. I mean, from our conversation with Ms. Petrov, she already said that we need to focus on one industry as Europe and be a pioneer in that area, right? Find our niche industry. So I believe that from this, one can infer that they are still an ally on paper, but it's most likely going to be that they will end up not being one. Yeah.
On the US and the transatlantic relationship, it's I don't really believe that we'll see a complete breakdown of the structure provided by NATO. The US can't actually withdraw from NATO with only the president's will. I think you need 60 votes in the Senate or something like that. So there needs to be a bipartisan agreement to withdraw from NATO on the US side. Then and so militarily, the cooperation seems to be still in place right now, and it will probably remain in place. What is, and I think what was the focus of our talks in the EP as well, is that Europe, this sort of extremely friendly and close transatlantic relationship where the US and the EU can be taken as a singular unit. That's what's going away right now, and that's why Europe needs to focus on its economic competitiveness.
Of course, when we speak about NATO, what comes to mind is Article 5. Mm-hmm. And in some sense, the mutual defense clause that the EU has is actually far stronger than what NATO has. Because in the Treaty of Lisbon, it states a mutual defense clause, which says that if a member state is the victim of armed aggression on its territory, the other member states have an obligation to aid and assist it by all means in their power. All means in their power, which is far stronger language than what is mentioned in Article 5 in NATO. So in some sense, within the EU, we have each other's back. However, personally, I do worry that with Russia in the east and possibly the US being somewhat of an ally with an asterisk and a question mark behind it, we do find ourselves stuck in between two countries who at least don't like the EU and Europe as a whole. Now, Ivan, could you tell us a bit more about hybrid warfare?
Sure. Now we see that the EU must protect itself by all means. This includes not only the attrition, which has seemed to prove itself effective in the past 50, 70 years in the continent, but also now we're seeing more and more threats from all sides. We have the digital cybersecurity attacks on the side of Russia right now in Ukraine. We have examples of misinformation, disinformation campaigns, which are aimed to manipulate European citizens to destabilize the Union on pretty much all levels. So
maybe just to add to that, it's also misinformation and disinformation can also be seen in elections as well. I think this is one of the more prominent examples of disinformation because it's a way of hindering democratic decision-making processes. And one of the recent examples also that Ms. Petrov was talking about was the election in Romania and how basically Russia intercepted it and they had to go for a whole other election. And this was done via social media as well. So I think that maybe we can cap it off by saying that the EU should work on boosting resilience in their critical sectors, but also resilience in the spheres of social media and maybe media literacy even.
One thing that's interesting here is that we are focusing on what's happening inside the European Union, which is logical, of course. But Russia is waging a big disinformation campaign within the EU. Now, someone in our group in Brussels mentioned a offensive campaign from the EU inside of Russia, which was very different from the other question we posed to the Danish representative there. Mm-hmm. And I would love to know what your stances are on it. Would the best way to defend ourselves from Russian hybrid warfare be offensive hybrid warfare within Russia?
If we take Russia as like a full opponent of the European Union, which it very much is, then it is not unreasonable to say that there should be offensive actions on Europe's part. You know, you can't fight a war with one hand tied behind your back. But I do believe that this is something that is in consideration when talking about Russia in European circles. It's just not necessarily something that they're very open about, is that there is not necessarily a realistic chance of a positive regime change in Russia. We saw that the one through destabilization of Putin's regime in the past few years has been Prigozhin's and Wagner's coup attempt, which obviously a Wagner-led Russia would possibly be even worse and more destabilizing to Europe than a Putin-led Russia. So I don't think regime change in Russia is necessarily in the EU's best interests in the short term.
Going on the offensive as the EU, as a sort of a foreign policy to counter Russian hybrid warfare is it is simply unrealistic and not very, it doesn't really address the problem. The goal of a hybrid warfare against Russia or a information war against Russia would be to enact regime change, and that is an extreme resolution, I would say, unless you really have your goal is to influence public opinion against regime. This would not really defend Europe from an offensive by the Russians. So therefore, this is and also, as you mentioned, a destabilized Russia is not necessarily in Europe's interest. We have to realize that Russia is a nuclear state. So outside of a complete collapse of the regime, you're not going to achieve anything with an information campaign against them. And if you succeed in an information campaign, then you have a whole new problem on your hands, which is that Russia is destabilized. It might splinter, it might go into civil war or anything. It's just going to create an even more high tension situation.
You saw this when the USSR collapsed. When the USSR collapsed, there was very much a chance of civil war in Russia, and it was a open goal of both the United States and the European community to stabilize Russia and avoid an open civil war, so much so that the US actually flew in foreign aid in 1991 and 92 to Russia to create a stable society.
Yeah, they even helped them move the nuclear weapons from the Soviet states into Russia. That's how much they were afraid of anything bad happening.
Bit besides the point, but the Ukrainian nuclear weapons, of course, were given back to Russia with a security guarantee, which they might look back at now with some doubts and question marks.
Regret.
Yes. Let's have a little pause.
The AGC Group is a world-leading glass supplier for the building, automotive and display industries. AGC also produces chemicals and other high-tech materials and components. At AGC Glass Europe, nearly 15,000 employees are working together to shape the future of glass and improve people's everyday lives.
3, 2, 1. That was a good one.
Yeah, we only needed one.
Okay, so now to wrap up, let's have a person-by-person conclusion of what we've just spoken about.
Sure, of course. So I think personally, my take on misinformation and the common defense policy of European Union is that I think Europe must protect its narrative sovereignty, and that is the ability to define and defend truths within its border. Because without truth, democracy dies from within and no military can save it. I also believe that media literacy needs to be seen as a part of national security, not just education. And we have to teach citizens to spot manipulated content and resist confirmation bias so that they can evaluate their sources. And I would like to end by saying that perhaps Europe could lead globally in ethical digital governance, not just fighting fake news, but reshaping platforms, making of transparency laws and digital ethics.
Okay, great. And now to answer again, to reiterate, the question we are answering here is what can the EU do to protect itself? I think your answer was great already. I would love to know what Ivan thinks about it.
Yes, thank you. So, right now, the threats are becoming even more surprising, even more diverse. So, when it comes to security, there's many different types of ways to protect ourselves, to protect the citizens, what they hold dear to themselves, being able to go on throughout their day without experiencing drastic changes. We must focus on digital sovereignty as well. We must focus on our foreign relations with Russia and China and the way that this has an impact on all industry. That would include social services, that would include technology that we import. We cannot really be safe if the Chinese government has access to our satellites, it has access to our communication networks. So if it has to be about the red tape, we must be very careful where we put it and where we cut it, but also have it in a way that makes sure that digital interference and disinformation are kept to a minimum, and that we must be stable in the face of war and foreign interference by having our channels, the ones that citizens once again use, be protected. We cannot allow cases as in Romania, as in Germany, to happen again, because social media has a profound influence on politics of daily people, on elections as well, and on the politicians that use them. It is very much used in war as well. Ukraine and Russia, it's a vital communication tool. Therefore, in the context of the latest political developments with the United States focusing on that, the new Trump administration, and the heightened role of Elon Musk, who also holds the bargaining chips, as was mentioned by Ms. Petrov, to Ukraine's victory, more or less, through his satellites and Starlink, and also the communication of X, or formerly Twitter. There is so much that encompasses our common defense that is outside of rockets, of guns, that is much easier for us to protect, and it's much more crucial given that we already have some experience in that.
Jonas, go ahead.
Yeah, so in terms of economic security, the EU has long been very reliant on foreign producers and foreign imports, and in terms of technological innovation, we have been lagging behind the US and China. That has been sort of key security risks that the EU has recognized and tried to deal with. So a lot of discussion is currently being held within the EU, but the problem is that a lot of policymakers are afraid that we can't really catch up to the US and China in a lot of key sectors. And so kind of developing a very strong, independent European economy that is at the forefront of innovation and development is not feasible in the short term. And instead, they think that a policy of strategic targeting of strategic links within the technology sector and within innovation to sort of bind the EU into the global supply chains will be a better strategy for the time being. So obviously, I'm sure that there are discussions internally within the EU about what should be done, what could be done, but like based on our conversations with Ms. Petrov, this is sort of the way forward.
Internationally and on the global stage, a key to, I guess, what you could call European independence, or even just Europe being an actor on the global stage, is credibility, building trust building credibility. So whether we're talking internally or in the perceptions of U.S. Vice President Vance is an example of this. Europe doesn't necessarily have the reputation of being able to act as a unitary, credible actor, and so one thing that Europe should focus on is replacing this image or repairing this image, and economic indispensability is an aspect of this. Definitely information warfare, being allowing a lot of Russian and Chinese originated disinformation to shape public discourse is definitely an issue here. So all of these aspects, I believe, feed into this credibility gap that needs to be closed.
Yeah, I see that as well. And now, lastly, I have to admit that I'm quite scared that what was once unthinkable, which is a Russian invasion of EU member states, could now well be an option for the Russian regime. And I feel like that this discussion is not just about the military threat, but also about what kind of Europe we want to live in. So I want to live in a Europe where borders are respected. And since that peace isn't a given, we should actively protect it. And I don't think this is panic. It's about being aware, it's about being informed and being prepared, most importantly. So I think the discussion about increased military spending should continue, and that the urgency of this increased spending is felt more in some Eastern EU member states, especially in the Baltics. And I feel like this urgency should be felt more in the rest of the Union as well. So while as this podcast has clearly shown, the answer to the question, what can the EU do to protect itself, is very nuanced. I think that much focus should be put on the military side of things, as peace isn't a given. Thank you for listening to this one-off episode of Truth from the Trenches, live from The Hague. We hope you enjoyed it and learned more about the European Common Defence and mis- and disinformation. Thank you again. Dankjewel.
Teşekkürler.
Köszönjük a figyelmet.
Благодаря.